Back in the summer, I made a video about how everyone was being really negative about D&D 2024 before even getting a chance to play or read it. Well, it's now 2025. I've played 13 sessions of D&D 2024 using those rules and those rules only, and I have some thoughts about it. So today we're going to be talking about D&D 2024 and some of the best and worst changes to the system. The first thing is the rules glossary. The rules glossary I was really excited about, thought it was going to be a really good idea, and it is. It's great. I love how there's an easy spot that I can refer my players if they want to look up a rule and they're always able to get an answer and I don't have to stop running the game to go look things up constantly. I can really easily guide my players to where they can find solutions. Here's what I don't like about it. It still doesn't have page references in it. It just has chapter and subsection references, but never a page reference. Would have been nice to see that included. A little bit of a disappointment to see that they didn't go through the effort to put in page numbers. Two is I wish it was organized categorically and alphabetically rather than just strictly alphabetically. That meaning I wish that we had conditions under the C's, and then under the conditions section, having all of the conditions listed out alphabetically again, but not having what we do have in the rules glossary, which is blinded is under the B's, deafens under the D's, and poisons under the P's. So you have to flip back and forth between all the different parts of the rules glossary to find the different condition definitions, rather than just having them all in one easy to look up area. Same with hazards and resting and the different targeting areas. That could have all been under different categorical sections organized alphabetically, and then organizing everything in the category alphabetically. That's just something I wish I saw. It probably wouldn't have been everyone's favorite, but hey, that's just me. The rules glossary is a good thing that they included, and I'm happy to see it there. So ultimately, I'd give it a thumbs up, not a thumbs down. The second change I want to talk about is the surprise round. It used to be the case in 2014 that if you were surprised, it meant you didn't act in the first round of combat, which was a big tipping point for combat because it means that if I can surprise some or all of my enemies, then me and my friends get to whack on them for a whole round of combat before they even get to do anything to us. Likewise, it can be very dangerous going through the corners of a dungeon knowing that at any moment some monster could leap out at you and get the jump, surprising you and all your friends and hitting all of you before you get a chance to hit them. So surprise was this high stakes, tense mechanic that they used to have in 2014. And they didn't get rid of it in 2024. They simply watered it down. And by that I mean you can still be surprised in 2024, and the mechanism for getting surprise is the same. Basically, the one party's stealth is higher than the other party's passive perception. But what happens is that you are just now disadvantaged on your roll for initiative. So unlike in 2014 where you didn't act in that first round, you still act in the first round in 2024, but you're just likely to go last. And it's not even guaranteed, because even with disadvantage, you could roll two 20s and still go first in the initiative order, which kind of makes it a little bit nonsensical. How are you surprised and yet you're still so alert that you're going to go first? Because those odds will eventually happen to someone. And even if it's not two 20s, it could still be two high numbers. So the point being is they took what used to be this very interesting and asymmetrical mechanic that could really tip combat one way or the other if you got surprised or not. It could make it a super easy fight or a super hard fight. Now it's just simply messing around with the initiative order, and that's not nearly as exciting as it used to be. For that reason, I'm going to have to give the changes to the surprise round a big thumbs down. In fact, in my campaign I'm running right now, this was the first rule we went back on because we all agreed at the table that it's just not nearly as exciting to have the disadvantage on initiative as opposed to being sat out for the first round of combat. My players want that when they surprise an enemy, and they're willing to accept the risk of it happening to them when they get surprised. That does lead me nicely into not a change, but something that I appreciate about 2024, and that is the backwards compatibility. I was very skeptical of the backwards compatibility, but hopeful that it would be done right. And I think it was done pretty okay. I like that it seems pretty easy to go use old races from Monsters of the Multiverse, which is pretty straightforward to do. You just, instead of assigning the ability scores to whatever you want, just following the background rules from 2024 and then getting all the other stuff. Very easy to do. It's also really easy to use subclasses. However, there's really no explanation on how to do so. It's just something you need to figure out. And basically what happens is if your class used to get your subclass earlier on, all those features that you would get at the earlier level, you now just get at level 3 when you get your subclass in 2024. If you didn't know, every class gets its subclass at level 3 now, as opposed to being staggered between 1, 2, and 3, which I do like because it does standardize it. And sure, there's lore reasons and background reasons why it's a little weird that, say, a warlock is finding out who their patron is at level 3, but you can flavor it with your players so that maybe they just unlock all these powers from their patron at level 3, but they had them all along. They just weren't doing as much for them. There's ways you can make it make sense, and I think the standardization of that mechanic in classes is worth that little sacrifice in lore, for me personally. Other people might disagree, and that's fine too. And if you really don't like it, you can still use the classes from 2014. They do integrate reasonably well. It's not like one is so much more overpowered than the other. And, you know, if you really want to just play an overpowered character, then that's your prerogative. So people who are going to min-max characters are still going to min-max characters. I don't think having the crossover between 2014 and 2024 is going to make that a huge issue. I haven't seen too much of that in my sessions so far, but we have done some old subclasses, and so far that's worked out pretty well. So I'm overall happy with the class changes. Moreover, because they've really balanced out the action economy of everything, it seems that most classes have viable bonus actions that they can take pretty reliably, whereas before it was dependent on which class you had if your bonus actions were going to be good or not so good. So I was happy to see that as well. And just the rebalancing of the classes, I personally was pretty happy with, and my players have been pretty okay with, more or less. Like, we're all nitpicking little things here and there, but nothing's going to be perfect. So overall, I'm going to give the class changes a thumbs up, and mostly because they really did a great job at explaining how character creation works. In 2014, the character creation explanation was kind of garbage, and it was really only through experience and having someone guide you through it that you were able to really master it. Now, maybe that was just me and my friends' experiences, and maybe other people had an easy time navigating that rule set, so just let me know in the comments if you think it was really easy in 2014 as opposed to 2024. I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts, but personally, I think they did a great job rewriting the how to build a character section and making it a lot more enjoyable for people to go through the process, and it's super easy to follow along, which I love because it does encourage new players to come to the game. Especially 2024, I find, is probably one of the most new player friendly games that still satisfies experienced players' itch for having some crunch, as well as, you know, just a lot of fun mechanics to play around with. That's said in a very vague way because I'm talking about spells, I'm talking about resting, I'm talking about subclass features, I'm talking about feat combinations, I'm talking about a lot of stuff when I say interesting mechanics. But for a new player, it's also really easy to get started. So we've talked about the rules glossary, we've talked about surprise rounds, we've talked about classes, we've talked about the character creation process, which overall I'm going to give it 2 thumbs up. I really think they nailed the character creation process. However, I'm going to have to give a thumbs down to backgrounds. While I do like the inclusion of origin feats, and I did like how they broke feats up, I'm not a real big fan of how they reduced down background to be basically just a little quarter paragraph of text. They had so much description in the backgrounds in 2014, and they had my favorite piece of the game, which was personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws. That's been completely removed. It, I think, puts a lot more onus on players to do the legwork of making a good background rather than guiding them through it. And given that they put so much effort into guiding us through character creation, I was very disappointed to see that they decided that backgrounds was something they could edit down rather than refine. I also don't like that they leaned more into the alignment matrix. I think that walking away from that with personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws was more powerful, and I really wish they would have expanded upon that. Granted, if you are a person who really cares about making a good background, you'll probably find third-party resources that are better than what was in 2014. And if you're just a very creative person, you might have no issue with this because you're going to make a great background regardless. But I think for new players, having the ability to get some guidance on what it means to make a background from the game mechanics is important. And it was really disappointing to see that taken away. So I am going to have to give it a thumbs down on the backgrounds, but everything else about the character creation has been pretty good. So the last thing I want to talk about is the changes to spells. Now, I think this kind of washes out as just being neutral. I don't think there were so many improvements to some spells that it breaks the game. I also don't think there are so many cutbacks to spells that it makes it completely terrible. A lot of things were changed. The cantrips were all kind of worked around and changed subtly, which is interesting. Like Poison Spray is now a ranged attack spell rather than a Constitution save. And another one I found funny was Chill Touch is now a touch spell. It's kind of like they were giving in to all the cruel criticism around it, but ironically, it just made the spell worse. Vicious Mockery, I was pleasantly surprised to see it's now a D6 instead of a D4 damage, which is great for bards considering they have so few damage cantrips. In the original 2014, bards only had Vicious Mockery. Now they also have Thunderclap, so at least they have a second damage spell. It was good to see that improvement. I was pleased as a GM to see the changes to Counterspell. Players, not so much. And also, I was happy to see the removal of Silvery Barbs, because that was never my favorite spell. Now, some of you may feel differently about all of these changes, particularly around spells. So if there's anything you're upset about or really stoked about in D&D 2024, let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. And as always, may the gods have mercy on your soul.